Hello. This is the GW Books Club, where me and my good friend Stu from the Miniature Realms channel here on YouTube take a look at the original 17 books published by Games Workshop between 1989 and 1990. This month, we read Shadowbreed by David Ferring, the second novel in the Konrad trilogy. And, well, I don't want to spoil the discussion for you, but it's a rough ride. So before we get into that conversation, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the story from the book. Young Konrad's next adventure begins with the warrior on the trail of the Bronze Knight that was present at the destruction of his hometown. The trail leads to the smoking ruins of the Kislev mine that Konrad and his mentor Wolf have been running for the past 5 years. Chaos marauders have slaughtered the inhabitants and burned down the settlement, but Konrad discovers a sole survivor called Heinler. Together they track the warband in case they have taken prisoners, but before Konrad can try to rescue anyone, he is knocked out and imprisoned himself. Whilst a guest of the Chaos Lord, he discovers a shared connection to his home, but then he escapes to continue his pursuit of the Bronze Knight. Finding the suit of bronze armor abandoned in the forest, Konrad dons it to fight off his former captors. Alarmingly, he is then unable to remove the armor, and it appears that he is imprisoned once again, with the armor feeding off of his life force. Fortunately for Konrad, he is released from this bronze prison by a kindly wizard and his dwarfs. From here, the embattled Konrad fights Skaven, Middenheim guards, and Skaven again, gets another clue to his forgotten history, joins the Altdorf city guard, and of course, gets captured, imprisoned, captured, and imprisoned a couple more times. Oh, and the former prisoner Heinler turns out to have been a Skaven all along, but that is the only mystery that is resolved in this entire text. Stu, we are here talking about the second book in the Konrad trilogy by David Ferring. This one is Shadowbreed. I found this to be something of a unusual adventure. I suppose I'll start that way. How did you find this one overall?
It's got its issues as a book, hasn't it? I think it's quite a mixed bag, and some bits that made me chuckle at the timing and the presentation, rather than in the deliberate writing that was meant to make you chuckle.
Yeah,
a little bit of eye rolling, and there were some moments that I suppose we'll get into it more as we talk about those individual elements of the book. But I'll give one example of it because I think it's perfect. It's that we get quite a way through the book, and it's almost like the author's gone, "Oh yeah, he's got that foresight thing with that one eye, and I've not used it in the book at all. And I need to write in here now why he's not." And then in the a couple of chapters later, I'm going to mention it again, just in case they've forgotten. It felt like he went, "Oh,
yep.
Yeah, I had a bag." It's that kind of moment of
yes. Yeah, there's more than one of those, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I think I minced my words at the start. I think, I'm gonna reveal my full feelings early on, unlike a usual GW Books Club, where I reserve judgment till later. I think that this might be, for me at least, the worst of the GW books that we've read. Possibly the worst story of any of the GW books we've read, including all of the shorts, which we know are quite patchy in quality. Yeah. But Shadowbreed, because it's a longer story, it's a full book, and it's so repetitive and mindless in many, many places and many, many ways. I really didn't enjoy this book at all. There's very few redeeming features. There's one or two things that I enjoyed of it, but unlike pretty much any GW book so far, it had very few redeeming features for me.
Right. I think there are worse for me.
Right.
Partly because there are elements of the story that are quite like the theme. I think they utterly failed in the delivery of them. There's almost multiple books in here. And if you stuck to one of those themes as the story, you could have made a better go of it. I'm not a massive fan of the style overall either. I think it's quite problematic because we're so much in the mind and of of Konrad himself that style bleeds out into every other part of descriptive writing in the book, and it feels
Mm.
like the author is constantly over explaining why
Totally.
things are a certain way. It's like, and then he may have done this because this would have happened, and he may not have. Like, he might have been full because he had too much tea on Tuesday, and he's just kind of, why are you over explaining this? You would normally explain this through some kind of exposition, through dialogue between characters,
Mm.
and then as a reader you go, you get it, but he almost feels like he's got to over explain each situation the way I do in conversation, probably many times, but you don't tend to find that in a story. It almost feels like it's something of the writer coming out into the way he's written his prose, essentially. But it's odd.
Yeah. There's a really good point, actually. Yeah. And I think part of that problem is born from the fact that early on, in fact, at the very start of the book, Konrad, our hero, abandons his friends because he goes on this quest to follow this bronze knight. That was obviously the cliffhanger that the first book ended on. It seems very clear to me that the author had no idea how that was going to be resolved, because the patchy way, and we'll get to it, but the patchy way in which the Bronze Knight story is
Yes.
somewhat resolved is just on its own pretty bad. But because Conrad's on his own throughout the whole story, he's got no one to talk to. So he can't
Yeah.
talk about how he feels. He can't get exposition from other people on a regular basis and sort of build up a relationship. He does have lots of interactions with random different characters, but they're constantly changing. So there's no
Yeah.
sort of relationship that builds over the course of the book. And then when we get stuff from within Conrad's own perspective, his inner monologue, he seems like the dullest person, like the least interesting hero you could imagine for an adventure like this.
Yeah.
There is just no introspection. There is nothing interesting happening within his mind. He sees stuff and then he sort of passively engages with it and then is buffeted
Mhm.
around all of these different things. And all he thinks about, he seems to constantly remind himself of that time 5 years ago when his village was burned down. Now,
Yeah.
I don't want to say that that wouldn't be a traumatic event. Obviously, that would be a significant moment in someone's life. But the way in which he's constantly sort of saying to himself, oh, wow, this really reminds me of when my village was burned down and Alyssa, the only person who ever loved me, was lost
Yeah.
to me. And then
Yes.
later on, in the same paragraph, he'll be, and this also reminds me of when my village was burned down when I was just a boy. And it's like, how many times? How many times do you need to tell us about this? There are moments in this book where something happens at the top of a page, and at the bottom of the page, we're reminded of the thing that happened
The
earlier
top of
on.
the yeah.
Unreal decisions were made during the writing of this book, and it got me quite agitated. I'm going to say that.
Totally. And we've got to remember that he wasn't very happy in his village.
No,
You could argue that he was badly
freed him.
treated
It
and
gave him a
wasn't
new
happy,
life.
and
Absolutely.
it did. And in terms of calamitous events, yes, it was a big one, but he's been involved in a lot of stuff since then. I could understand from if he was in love with Alyssa, that losing her, or he thinks he's lost her, that could be the thing you return to. But yeah, but you were right about that constant kind of, my village was burned down, blah blah. Yes, he's been on one hell of a journey in the 5 years, I think it is, or something like that, since it's happened. Yeah, it's just, again, everything is just over explained and explained again and constantly, in place of other writing, the writing that should be there, which is dialogue with characters, really, to really explore some things, because there's some really cool themes and ideas in it. The part when he's effectively a prisoner or a slave. There's some great story ideas, some really gruesome scenes in it. But again, that part seems to end quite quickly.
Yeah.
The whole finding the bronze armor thing was just bizarre.
Oh boy, yeah.
But then the actual hook, the idea of what this bronze armor is,
yes,
it's really cool.
Yeah,
then that should be the whole story.
exactly this.
You'd
Yeah,
almost the payoff for that should be at the end of book 3, and maybe
yeah,
he shouldn't discover the armor until. I think that's really could be something that's really powerful if you make it the main thing. But when you make
yeah.
it trivial, it's just a bit weird. And why did you? It becomes why did you put it on again? Because when I was reading it, I was thinking, why are you putting this on? This is weird. Uh,
Yeah,
because at the point you don't realize where the previous knight has gone at that point. You just think he's probably having a wash in the river, and
sure.
you walk. You know, what would you do if you were walking along and oh, this is the guy I've been following? Well, his armor's there. Gonna put his clothes on. It's weird. But in terms of the payoff for it, it could be really powerful, but it's just not. Again, it's just made to be really, really strange.
Yeah,
And it's just like that again and again. It's almost like he's trying to squeeze in lots of settings. It's like he's gone back and read Godric and Felix, the first book from Bill King, and looked at all these different locations and these Warhammery things, and he's trying to make this story more Warhammer, and that's why we got a bit of Middenheim. This is why we got a bit of Altdorf, because I quite like some of those bits, but
Mm.
it feel like they're all kind of either short stories or should be part of a wider story. That's why it's not my least favorite story ever, because there are little bits I enjoy, but as chapters rather than
yeah,
the overall story. Because as an overall story, it doesn't work.
yeah.
But
Because
if it's a short story, it would be fine.
yeah, I think that's an interesting point because it's not a novel. I think is the thing. It's full of so many arbitrary sort of moments that start and stop almost at random. They just the arbitrary nature of okay, now Konrad is a prisoner of a Chaos Lord. What does that look like? And we're going to tell a little bit of that story, and then as soon as Ferring is bored of it or has run out of ideas for that particular element, it just instantly is stopped. And it just, the
Yeah.
decision is clearly made to go, okay, now I need the next one. And maybe if they were a collection of short stories, you might be able to get away with that. And it's like, okay, we're not going to do there's going to be no connective tissue. These are episodes in the life of Konrad as he seeks the truth about his origin.
Yes.
That could have been interesting. Okay, this short story is just whilst he was a prisoner of a Chaos Lord. This short story is whilst he was wearing some cursed Chaos armor, and so on and so
Yes.
forth. But because he tries to sort of connect them, you get these really uncomfortable transitions between these sort of short episodes.
Agreed.
So the
Agreed.
Chaos Lords one, like you say, it's quite interesting. It introduces a totally ridiculous coincidence. Now, we'll come back to this, I think, but the idea of fate and whether or not the gods are playing with Konrad could arguably be a theme of the book, but it's very heavy-handed, I think. So we find out that this Chaos Lord, who happens to have attacked the mine where Konrad used to work, and the mine that he's gone back through chasing down the Bronze Knight.
Yeah.
In the mine, they discover that it's completely destroyed. Konrad meets a guy called Heinle, and the two of them decide, quite foolishly, we're going to take on the entire Chaos Marauder army on our own in case they've captured anyone else from the mine. And all of a sudden, Konrad is besotted with the woman that he briefly spoke to at the end of the previous book, and he just abandoned her and left her. Now he's desperate to find her because he thinks she might still be alive.
Well, you get the impression, don't you, that they've been seeing each other for a little bit longer. That's kind of fluffed out a little bit.
It seems
more
more
in the story,
meaningful, absolutely. Yeah. In this book, it feels like it's retroactively more important than it felt in the previous
I remember
book.
we questioned with the first book, well, who
Why
was
is
she?
this
Why
here?
does she just?
Yeah.
Maybe it felt like some of her scenes have been edited out or something,
Sure.
and it made less sense.
Yeah, and Konrad gets himself captured, obviously, because he's not going to take out an entire invading Chaos army. And the Lord keeps him alive because it turns out that the Lord is Ilyssa's brother. So Ilyssa being the girl who died in the hometown when it got burned down. If you remember, it got burned down 5 years
Yes.
ago when it was
Did he get
burned
burnt
down.
down?
It did, yeah. Um,
Hopefully he's not suffering from that and no trauma. That's kind of
so you get this revelation that, oh wow, there's a Chaos Lord and there's a direct connection to Konrad's youth and to the woman that he loves and has lost. This must lead to some really interesting storytelling. And then there is nothing revealed at all. No
yeah,
secrets, just nothing. It's just a coincidence that's mentioned.
yeah,
And then in the forest nearby, Konrad sees the bronze armor and just goes, right, time for me to leave then. And then he just escapes his imprisonment and goes off and finds
yes.
the armor. I mean, how? What did you enjoy that that idea?
No, no. So I mean, there's lots of issues with it. I mean, I quite like that when he was captive. I quite like those scenes we had.
Sure.
Awful names, but Silk and what was her twin called?
Oh, these like the demonettes, the sort of faux
Satin,
demonettes.
Silk and Satin.
Silk
Yeah,
and
I mean,
Satin.
yeah, obviously, there's perfect names for a sort of a demonette.
Yeah, not quite
They
demonettes,
weren't
but yeah.
full demonettes. They only had tails. None of the. I think they had two and and no snippy claw. So as you definitely
Sure.
there was
Yeah.
it definitely made a big part on how attractive they were. Maybe
Yep.
we should have called them, I don't know, Brian Craig and instead
Oh.
of Silk and Satin. But I thought that part was quite good. And I didn't mind the way he escaped, really. He there was a bit of lovemaking, but he killed her, and it was, I think all of that worked again as a short story thing, but yes, it was kind of right. I need to end this bit now because he needs to chase that bronze armor again.
Mm.
But yeah, I wasn't really a fan of how he just found the armor. But as much as I do quite like the idea of the hook of the power of that armor, and that it's
Yeah.
basically takes the life force of whoever wears it, unless they are killing. And and it gets to the point where if you stop killing, you stand still, and then slowly it eats you. I love it. That's a really good idea. But
Yeah.
maybe as I said, the payoff for the whole thing.
Yeah.
At the end of book 3, he finally catches up and kills the person, takes the armor, and then finds out he's doomed. There's a really nice twist at the end.
I mean,
of it
that
or
would be
something.
quite good. Yeah, that could have been really fun.
But it's just made light of. It's such an important thing that's made
Well, because
made
it's
light of.
actually a really inconsequential obstacle in the end. And so he literally finds the bronze armor and the bronze steed just in the forest, almost like leaning up against a tree. And like you say, rather than think, oh wow, this must mean the knight is nearby and vulnerable, he thinks, I'm going to put this armor on and mount the steed and use it to fight off my former captors of the Chaos Lord. And then it's a really interesting idea that this is a cursed set of chaos armor that is going to swallow you whole. It is feeding off of you. And presumably the previous knight who was wearing it has just been consumed totally.
You completely disappeared.
Yeah. I mean, that is quite a cool idea. And there's definitely a weight to that. And as we got that and that sort of initial revelation, I was like, oh wow, this is a good idea. Finally, the story is starting. And maybe we're going to get some more. I don't know. I thought there might be some time travel stuff. I thought maybe the Bronze Knight who Konrad had seen heralding the attack on his village 5 years earlier was going to turn out to be Konrad himself somehow. It kind of felt like, oh, there's going to be something interesting happening here. The forces of chaos are manipulating Konrad. Because if you'll remember as well, coming out of the first book, I was curious if Konrad's destiny was to be Sigmar reborn,
Yes,
or to be an agent of chaos without knowing it. So this was definitely playing into my own sort of preconceived potential ideas. So I was really excited. I was like, wow, we're finally going to get into something super interesting. And then the resolution of this armor storyline was just, I don't like to use too harsh language here, but I found it to be absolutely atrocious. Just
Yeah.
really the worst kind of writing, because it felt very, I don't like to call a writer lazy, but it felt like there were page counts that needed to be filled, and
Yeah.
we just need to move it along. So what's the
But he moved
quickest
along
way?
really quickly because he had the armor, and then you almost get this. You imagine this montage of him doing a bit of killing. He kills Castring, his Alyssa's brother,
Mm,
while he's wearing this armor, and the other knights, because they catch up with him, but he's powerful because he's got this armor, so he kills them quickly. So again, you don't find much about
no
that part of the
information.
story.
Yeah.
So is there more coming later on about that? Hopefully, yes, maybe. And there are clues to that right at the end that we might find out more about that. But that went quickly. And then at the end of that, it's almost like, right, we need him out of this armor now. So we're going to bring along this left field excuse and reason to change the story yet again. There just seemed to be no peril because he wasn't really, as much as he was stuck in this armor and he's taken his lifeblood, but only for about half a page. So it doesn't matter. So the whole power of anything you write around the jeopardy of wearing this armor, a real dichotomy of what's he going to do? The power of this armor, but then also he's stuck in it, was nothing because he froze up like Iron Man without any oil, and then he was found by some dwarves and a magician.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it is really, in the worst possible way, it's just lifeless. It's just there's no excitement to the story. So the threat that's introduced, the cool idea that's introduced, is almost immediately neutralized because this random wizard, Litzenreich, turns up. He's got a load of dwarves, and somehow they just freeze him in his tracks wearing this chaotic armor. And then they realize, oh, wow, there is actually someone inside the armor. And for no reason at all, because this is a chaos suit of armor that's been killing people left and right, presumably, riding through the Empire for many years doing this, 5 years at least. They just are like, oh, wow, there must be some innocent guy inside this armor, I guess. So they decide to take the guy back to their secret base underneath Middenheim and then expend a huge amount of extremely valuable warpstone to free him from the armor. And it's not clear whether or not there are permanent scars from this. At least I didn't find it. At some points, it seemed like it was fused. The armor was fused to his skin.
Yeah, and
it was going to be really painful
when it was
and
peeled
really
off.
scarred. Yeah, and then later on, there's sort of it didn't feel like that was a continued problem for him.
You've gone from sort of severe burn type injuries to actually probably just a
fine.
top layer.
Yeah,
top layer.
Exactly that.
A bit weepy skin. You'll be, you'll get a bit dry and flaky, but you'll be all right in a couple of weeks.
So there's no consequence to the armor at all. And now Konrad is a prisoner yet again, not of the Chaos Lord, not of the Chaos Armor, this time of this random wizard guy who actually it turns out is okay, a grey wizard, I suppose.
Yeah. Ish. Yeah, he's a strange character. Yeah. We've got more to learn about him, I suppose, because he's still part of the story at the end. But it's weird. It's weird, but he has to pay the wizard back by finding him some more warpstone, essentially.
Yeah.
So this is where they kind of crowbar in previous characters into the mix. So he needs to go back underground under Middenheim to search for warpstone, and he's there with dwarves, and we meet Heinler again, don't we? The man that disappeared when he was captured, and Heinler turns out is a Grey Seer Skaven who was using some kind of spell. But the way it's described is awful. It's almost like, oh yeah, Konrad always did think he looked a little bit like a rat.
Yeah.
It's like, really? I mean, I won't read out exactly what I put in my notes, but there's 3 words at the end. The first word is "oh," and the third word is "off." Because of my genuine reaction to reading that.
Yeah,
it was just
my eyes rolled out of the back of my head and down into the chaos wastes. It was just the most groan-inducing, absurd. I don't even want to call it a twist because it's just so unearned To literally just say, oh, that character who was in the novel earlier, who did nothing and was totally inconsequential, he is actually a Skaven guy in disguise, and now he's the big bad of this whole story. Because if you sort of, it doesn't stand up to any scrutiny whatsoever, because you have to get to a place of believing, like within the logic of the Warhammer world, that a Skaven Greyseer, who is in this book in charge of a major operation taking place underneath Middenheim, for some reason traveled several days out of the Empire to a mine in Kislev in order to do one spell in order to help an entire Chaos Marauder army overwhelm a minor mining operation. So that is the reason the Greyseer went all that way on his own to do that spell, and then waited until after the Chaos Marauders had left, just in case one random Konrad guy turned up. And he's disguised himself as well for the purposes of this operation. It is the most ludicrous, terrible reveal of a big secret, a big twist that you can possibly imagine, because it just doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't add anything good to the book.
No, not at all.
It's bad. It adds only bad things.
Yeah, I've got nothing more to say. My 3 words said it all.
I mean, they do. They really do. And my further, just to add insult to injury, and this might just be a personal thing, but I found that the Skaven's real name. So Heinle is the name of the prison miner who he pretended to be when he was under the human illusion sort of glamour. The real name of the Skaven Greyseer is Gaxar.
Yeah.
Which just, again, it's like the laziest kind of Skaven name. It doesn't even feel like a Skaven name to me. It feels like a character name from He-Man or something, rather than from the Warhammer world.
A lot of the names aren't good. The only names that seem to work are the humans of Germanic.
Well, Konrad is a good name.
But again, he falls under that. The dwarf names aren't exactly great either. Ustnar, and they're not terrible, but Gaxar's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
let's face it. Skullface. Come on.
Oh, you've stumbled there into the brilliance of the main villain we discover. I mean, we might as well talk about it now. Don't worry, we'll come back to all of the good stuff that happens before the end of the book. But at the end of the book, the big reveal is that, oh wow, Skullface, the guy called Skullface, which is just rubbish. I'm sorry, but it's just a terrible name. Skullface, who was randomly present at the destruction of Konrad's hometown and seems unkillable and is mentioned a couple of times through the course of this book, is present in Gaxar's secret mission and doesn't do anything, just literally stands there.
Just turns up at the end.
And the whole sort of reveal that we're supposed, the big twist, the end bit of cliffhanger magic that's supposed to get us excited about the next book is Konrad on his way out, literally seeing this guy and going, oh no, it's Skullface. And like, that's it. That's the whole thing of we're supposed to be, wow, what a major moment that's really like hit home the power of this storytelling. Oh boy. I mean, there's another twist which we can come back to as well, which is equally powerful, I felt. But yeah, just on Gaxar and the Skaven-ness of the whole thing. The way in which this book is constructed and the way in which these surprises play out and all of the characters and all of the moments, I feel it's a very sort of cartoony kind of approach to storytelling. It's very arbitrary. It's very convenient. It's, Inspector Gadget coming up against the Claw, and it's just kind of like, oh, this guy has to survive because he's going to be there next time, Gadget, next time. And this guy, this moment has to happen just because we want to advance the plot. So it doesn't matter how we get there, and it doesn't matter what happens after it. It moves us from A to B to C. So nothing has any weight, nothing has any sort of import. We just progress because that's what you do in a book. You just flip the pages and keep on going until you get to the end of the book. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what's on the pages, just it's just words in order to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And is it this needless detail of things that are unrealistic in order to reach a point? So Konrad has to speak to the wizard and the dwarf who are being held captive. And they're being held captive by the city guard rather than the imperial guard, which arrested them when they've gone on to Altdorf. So we skipped ahead a little bit here, but it really doesn't matter. So they've gone on from Middelheim to Altdorf following the Gaxar, basically.
Yeah.
And there's all this useless information like, well, they quite like to follow the law in Altdorf. So therefore, this sword that Konrad has got, even though he got it from the dwarf, was stolen from Middenheim, and they must return this sword to Middenheim because we're law-abiding people. And it's kind of, they wouldn't give a about that. This wouldn't be a thing. But this becomes the setup for the whole reason why he has to impersonate an officer to go and speak to the other prisoners. When there's so you could just say he wanted to go and speak to them because he's an officer. You don't need to have a concocted story that's really feels unrealistic that regular soldiers would give a damn about where someone's store to come from in a completely different duchy about returning it. You know, this isn't kind of there's no Interpol here. This is
I mean, I didn't mind too much. Like, at least it felt in one of the rare instances of the book where it felt like anybody had any kind of like agenda that made any sense was the captain wanted Konrad to work for him. So he was going to twist his arm by coming up with this like archaic nonsense about the swords. So I was kind of willing to forgive it. What I was not willing to forgive was that the captain was like, "Oh, you don't remember me, do you, Konrad? We crossed paths randomly somewhere else." And again, maybe this whole book is about how there's no such thing as a coincidence. It's all this grand plan that Sigmar or Tzeentch or whatever is executing, and Konrad is just an agent of the gods. He's being moved around on the chessboard that the gods are looking down on. Maybe that's the theme. But if it is, it's so badly executed as a story because it doesn't feel good to read, or we're not clued in a way that's like letting us solve the puzzle in the background, so we don't get to feel smart as readers going like, "Oh, look how cool that is, look at the way this is sort of being orchestrated." It's literally just it feels to me like a writer who is literally got to get the pages in by the end of the day. So he just is like, and then I'll repeat that thing about the village, that's another bit of this page covered in words, then I'm just going to have some random conversation with some random guy, and then this random thing's going to happen.
It feels like group work. It feels like we could sit there with a deck of cards and we all pull out a character and a plot device, and then for a fun game on a Friday evening that we have to kind of, one person starts, we go around the table and we have to continue the story along using not only your bits but at least two of the other people's plot device or characters, and you make up the story as you go along. You end up with this weird kind of fun thing you all have a laugh at, but it's not actually the way you would set out and plan a novel.
No.
And I've got no expectation reading the next book that by chapter 3 we haven't set up another angle or plot device 100%. Or something that we're going to go off again.
Guarantee it now. I can almost guarantee that there's going to be all sorts of new stuff introduced, because I remember we were cautiously optimistic, I think, after reading Konrad. There were a load of question marks over, okay, here's a load of threads. They could be quite interesting. We were warned by people who'd walked this path before us that don't expect any big revelations and don't expect anything sort of, clever to happen with all of these different potential threads. I could not conceive of how little the author would care about his own creation, his own
Yeah.
mysteries. Like I at least thought there would be some attempt to make these things interesting, to make them pay off in some way. But they really don't, and there really isn't any effort. It very much feels to me like something is put down, a thread. Okay, what happened with Alyssa? What happened with the second sight that Konrad had? Why did he get that? What happened with the mirror where he saw himself as an old man? What
Yeah.
happened with Kristen, the lady who might have been taken prisoner by the Chaos Marauders? So all of these mysteries are raised, and they're literally just put to one side, and nothing happens relevant to them at all for pages and pages, chapters and chapters. And then the writer remembers about them, picks them up again, and just goes, "It didn't matter." Like it just that's it. He just will write a line of dialogue that just says, "Oh, and then that thing I was so consumed by at the start of the book didn't matter," and that's
Yeah.
it. You know, you mentioned that Castring, the Chaos Lord, who may have a connection to Alyssa, he's just dead. He's gone.
Yeah.
The Kristen, the woman who Konrad puts his entire life at jeopardy for, abandons his quest to find the bronze armor for, which has been this major driving force that's started the book. He puts that to one side because he's like, oh God, I feel guilty about Kristen. I've got to go and see if the Chaos Lord has got her. He never finds out. He never finds out if the Chaos Lord did have her, if she did survive. He just runs off because he gets trapped in the armor, and then he goes off. He's just buffeted off into another adventure. We never find out what happened to her. And Konrad doesn't care because once he's on his new quest, he's all about Warpstone and Gaxar and whatever else. And all of the sort of things that were built up previously are just totally abandoned. Oh boy. I mean, this book really got under my skin.
Maybe Konrad has got ADHD because it feels it's kind of, and it feels like that there's kind of, pick up this story, pick up that.
Sure.
Oh, go back. Oh yeah, we need to go back to that one. I haven't finished it. Oh yeah, I'm not really interested in that anymore. So we'll close it down really quickly with a couple of lines. So that's put to bed because I've moved on to something else now. And the story feels a little bit like that. And I don't say that in a derogatory way. I do some things like that myself, especially when it comes to hobby. So it comes from a place of recognition. But it's definitely crazy. It's definitely
it is. Yeah. I mean, in terms of like the structure of a book and trying to fathom out what the aim of this novel was, again, besides the kind of point I made earlier about just filling pages with words, there doesn't really seem to be anything else to learn from this story. Konrad doesn't learn anything about his past. It just treads water for him. And he's kind of in the same place he was at the start of the book. Maybe there are some things that are connected to his childhood, but he doesn't really know anything more about them. We have characters who were introduced in the previous book who are mentioned throughout this one who just don't appear. I really thought we were going to see Wolf return because there's kind of a sense that we're going to the city that Wolf is from. So I think he's mentioned he might be from Middenheim or he spent some time there. Obviously, the bronze armor had been...
Yeah, they mentioned about the wolf emblems on shields and things. So I thought, here we go.
And there's a relationship. We're told in the previous book, in an offhand comment, that Wolf is related to the knight in the bronze armor. So surely, if we're going to establish that the knight in the bronze armor is now dead and has been consumed by the armor, well, there's got to be some sort of emotional payoff to that with Wolf, whose brother it is. No. We're not going to get any of that. Maybe we'll get that in the third book, but by then it's going to be emotionally inert because we're so far past that, like the impact of it. So there's just very odd. The bronze armor completely destroyed. So when they take it off of him, they manage to destroy it, melt it down. You mentioned before they use all of this warpstone that's super valuable in order to remove it from Konrad, and then the price that they exact from him is for him to go and get more warpstone. So they could have just not released him at all and kept the original warpstone in the first place. There is then this absurd thing that Litzenreich, the wizard, is aware that Konrad now has like the scent of warpstone because of that operation. And the Skaven will know he's coming because they'll be able to smell him. So Litzenreich, the wizard, just sends his dwarves to get killed No guarantee they'll even get any warpstone because Konrad is a walking trap. It's bizarre. The decision making of every character is questionable.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's many points reading this. I was thinking, well, surely the editors at some point are going to go. But maybe it was just so bad they were like,
there's no time.
We need to write. Yeah, whatever.
Well, there's that. I had a similar thought, and actually, and again, I don't want to besmirch anybody here, but the editing on this, on the version of the book I read, was particularly bad when it came to things like typos. So there were loads and loads of typos, loads of sort of grammatical inconsistencies, that sort of stuff. It did feel like it hadn't been as heavily edited as some of the other books might have been. And then even at the end of the book, there is a moment when our heroes are sort of planning their next move. So it's Litzenreich, it's one of the dwarfs. It might be Usnar, it might be one of the other ones.
It's Usnar, yeah.
Usnar, right? So it's Usnar, Litzenreich, and Konrad together. The three of them are deciding what they're going to do next. And then some of the dialogue between those three is attributed to Gaxar the Skaven Greyseer. So you're reading it, and there's a moment when it's like, is Gaxar part of the squad now? Like, is he on the team to defeat Gaxar? Is actually the guy that they're... It was so odd. And I know, I'm being picky. I'm being a pedant. Sure, these things happen, typos happen, and mistakes like that happen all the time. But it just spoke to me of how little care and attention seemed to have been lavished on this book. It didn't feel to me at any point like the author or the editor or just anybody involved was really that invested in making this into a good book.
Yeah. I mean, we've not even touched on the kind of the plot that when I mean
did
the
it have
plot
one?
of the book. No, I don't mean the plot of the book. I mean Gaxar's
right,
plot.
okay.
And the reason they've gone on to Altdorf in the
sure,
first
yeah. Go. I mean,
because
this was hastily added as well.
Yeah, the weird. First of all, we had the weird Konrad clone thing.
Sure.
And then the kind of implication that maybe Gaxar has maybe cloned an emperor, but sort of made out of dead people and something else. It's very poorly explained and left in a very hint, because if I decide in the next book that I'm going to forget about this and not mention it again, then you won't miss it as much if I don't fully write it into the story. But it does feel like he's heading to Altdorf because you might need to save the emperor.
Yeah, that's right.
But then so vague in the story, and then he's gone again by the end because the payoff is Skullface and someone else. I don't know if you want to bring that up just yet.
Before we get to that, I mean, I think you're right. So they introduced this odd subplot sort of thing quite late on. As you mentioned, Konrad, who is randomly present. So there's no way anyone could know Konrad is going to be arriving in this Skaven base, because Konrad is only here because he escaped from a Chaos Lord, found some random Chaos Bronze armor, put it on, and then was saved by a wizard who for some reason decided to invest all of his warpstone in saving him. So there's just no possible way anyone could realize that Konrad is about to enter the Skaven base. And yet, Gaxar the Skaven, who's previously been Heinler the Human, who helped get Konrad captured ages ago, is almost stood there with his hands on his hips when Konrad walks in, just saying, "Ha ha ha! I knew you would come, Konrad." And there's this moment of like this kind of cartoony sort of feel of the villain is waiting for Konrad to arrive, despite the fact that it makes no sense in the world that Konrad is there. And he's so ready for Konrad to be there that he's made a magical necromantic clone of Konrad ready to fight Konrad. So they have this ridiculous fight where they are mirror matching, because it's Konrad. So Konrad versus sort of Nega Konrad or evil Konrad. They fight, and they're blow for blow, and then Konrad's like, I'm gonna have to do something I would never have thought of before, because I know every single martial art. I'm gonna have to come up with some kind of incredible, innovative move that even I, Konrad, couldn't imagine Konrad doing. He does, and then it just ends, and he defeats the evil Konrad zombie. And the whole point of that, which was bad, it was a bad action scene, but the whole point of that was to get Konrad captured, and then also to set up the potential plot that you mentioned about there being a zombie necromantic clone of the Emperor, who is introduced just so briefly in just
And
the
played
shadows
down.
of a corridor.
And almost played down at the same time, as in the way he does with the over explanation and thinking. There's almost like, this might be some awful plot to replace the Emperor, but it might not be, actually. It might just be, this might be a coincidence.
Yeah.
Might just look a bit like the Emperor. Might not be him at all. That's kind of
so that you get this moment then. So Konrad has now been captured again and freed again. So he's now on something like this third or fourth imprisonment in this book. Him and Litzenreich, the wizard, and Usnar, the dwarf, there's then kind of a fun sort of formulation of like a traveling party where they travel from Middenheim to Altdorf on the coach, and then they use magic in order to make it seem like they've paid and that they've got reservations in all of the coaching inns and stuff. So there's kind of this like fun, oh, now they're going on a quest again. It feels like the story's finally starting. But as soon as they get out of the coach in Altdorf, they're immediately arrested. I mean, fortunately, this is probably the only time in the book when Konrad doesn't get imprisoned, because that's the bit you mentioned where he gets recruited into the guard. There's a hilarious sequence following that. Usnar and Litzenreich are taken to the prison. They're now the guests of the Altdorf city guard. Konrad has become a trainer for the city guard. And there's a long sequence where he talks about having sort of found a new zen in life, and he's come to terms with being a guard, and now he's actually training people and sort of seeing them flourish out on the training grounds doing the drills. And it kind of establishes it in such a way as it's like, oh wow, this must be like years of being a trainer and being in charge. And then he says, like, it's been a busy week. And it just is like, this is ridiculous. What are you doing? Like, what is happening here? And then, of course, as you mentioned, he sneaks in using the sword thing and all of that. He sneaks into the prison to go and see Litzenreich and Usnar to free them, and just so happens to arrive as they have been captured from within a prison by the Skaven. So then you get the final encounter with Gaxar and the reveal of Skullface. And just by the by, in the prison in Altdorf, there is a door that no one knows how to open. It's just at the end of a corridor in the deepest cells where they keep all of the worst criminals. There's just a door that may or may not lead to a secret Skaven base, but the city guard don't want to check it out. Turns out it does lead to a Skaven base, so that's unfortunate. And that's where Litzenreich and Usnar have been taken. There's actually, it's really horrific, actually, where they have been nailed into the rock. There's like nails through their hands, and it sounds very grim and very painful. And that's when we get Konrad runs in, and just one of the city guard runs in with him, and then that's another moment where Gaxar.
Yeah.
Impossible to anticipate Konrad's arrival, but Gaxar turns around and he's like, "Oh, Konrad, I've been expecting you again."
Yeah. Again, we just touch on that Gaxar is always in human form, clearly for no other reason than he doesn't want to have to write in Skaven dialogue. So it's a lot easier for him to write in Old Worlder. So you get no yes kind of Skaven stuff. It's just kind of like, oh yes, and Gaxar was in human form again. Why would he be in human form? He was
Oh,
in
because
that form once to trick someone. Why would
he's
he be?
always expecting Konrad to be right around the
It's like
corner.
buying
So
a fancy dress costume, but then wearing it to every event ever because you want to get your money's worth out of it. So yeah. Anyway, back to you describing what happens
Oh,
when they.
that's the kind of thing, though. There's so many of those just things that don't make any sense, that don't stand up to any kind of scrutiny. And listen, there are loads of books, both within the GW books range and wider fantasy and non-genre fiction, that have plenty of these kind of ridiculous, convenient coincidences for just to help out, grease the wheels of the plot. I've got no problem with those as a general rule, as long as they don't stand out, as long as they feel like they are helping the story progress, and I don't really notice them. Plot holes and inconsistencies, they're all over the place. Most of the time, they're fine because you don't have to put that extra level of scrutiny on them because you enjoyed the story and it worked well enough. In this case, it's just so many of those things glued together like some kind of Skaven brood horror of plot hole and inconvenient sort of nonsense that it's not a satisfying read. I just constantly found myself, if it wasn't my eyes rolling or groaning at the absurdity of it, or laughing at the absurdity of it at one point. I mean, I think like yourself, I think the Heinle revelation that he was actually a Skaven guy all along, I genuinely think I chuckled to myself ironically in the coffee house where I was reading the book, getting some strange looks because it was just so ridiculous. But by that point, I was like, "Oh, of course, that's what's happened in this book."
Yeah, it's just a book full of convenience, isn't it?
It
Everything happens.
is, yeah.
Even that last moment when he walks in and Gaxar's there, and then out of nowhere he pulls out this hand crossbow, which is already fully primed and loaded, that he's only been using for a week, but's clearly learnt it to the point of expert. Left-handed, I think, as well. Shoots Gaxar straight through the eye, kills him. That's straight away.
Yeah, like, Gaxar's gone. Gaxar's done.
Gaxar's there. No, he's not.
Yeah, which it's ridiculous because it doesn't even play like a cool surprise, because as I mentioned, that sort of training montage we had didn't allude really to a crossbow. It might have talked about a new weapon, maybe, but it didn't feel like it was one of these cool sort of Chekhov's crossbow. It didn't feel like it was set up and then paid off. It just felt like, yeah, it's a convenient thing. I'm going to do this.
It's clearly because we've been expecting you, Mr. Bond.
Yes, yeah, which could have been quite a cool moment of subverting the sort of the villain monologue, or it could have been one of those moments when you kind of are saying, okay, actually, yeah, the villain thinks they've got the one up on the hero, but we're going to twist the tables and reveal something fun here. But he kind of already did that in the first book when the Goblin Shaman was about to kill Wolf, and Konrad came in and killed him with the bow in his first shot. He just does that again here. So it doesn't subvert anything. It just reinforces what we've already seen. And it was kind of cool in the first book because it felt like a moment where Konrad had to put all of his concentration and all of his training into that one shot to make it count in order to save Wolf's life. So it was kind of cinematic in that sense. Whereas here, it just is. It's kind of like, oh, well, we didn't really care about Gaxar anyway, and no one's really a threat here. So I guess Gaxar's done.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're also the prisoners. So Litzenreich and Ustnar. He goes to great pains, as I was saying. He talks about how they've been nailed to the ground through the hands. So it's quite brutal. But then Konrad removes those pins, and then they're both able to operate at full function. So Litzenreich is instantly using his hands to do complex spells, and Ustnar picks up a hammer and gets straight into the fight. There's kind of no cost to them for having been in such a vulnerable position. And then we introduce the sort of, well, I think it had been introduced a little bit earlier when there were some traps and loads of random soldiers got killed in an earlier bit that we didn't talk about that was not that interesting. But they did the part of the cliffhanger that's supposed to lead us into the third book is that Konrad encounters a Skaven who has a shield, and the shield has the same heraldry as the same coat of arms as the bow that and the quiver that he was given in the first book. So so Konrad once again becomes obsessed with this fact, much like he became obsessed briefly with saving Kristen. He's now obsessed with capturing this Skaven and asking him where he got the shield he's using, as if a Skaven wouldn't have just picked it up wherever and is using it. If he can even speak English or Reichspiel,
maybe just turn into a human so he can talk.
But yeah, so there's just this ridiculous thing of now. So Konrad's like, wow, I've got to chase that one Skaven down to the ends of the earth because I need to ask him about the shield he's got. And it just doesn't carry any weight. It's not an interesting clue because besides anything else, every time we've followed up on the sort of mysterious events of the first book, it's been unsatisfying. It's been things like Castring saying, "Oh yeah, I'm from that village, but I've got no further information for you." Yeah. So why on earth we should think, oh, it's going to be super interesting when we find out how this Skaven got this shield? I don't know. I mean, are you excited to find out what the heraldry means?
I don't know if we're going to. As you think we probably will, but it depends whether he gets distracted along the way and starts telling another different story. It depends whether he's remembered he wrote that. I don't know. He might remember halfway through the book and say,
just randomly,
and it just finds out that heraldry was just a common heraldry, by the way, and it was used by lots of people. Yeah. Konrad read about that while he was recuperating when he's borrowing books from the library of the wizard. Who knows really? It's you feel like he's got to get to the end of some, we're clearly not going to get answers to everything. It's going to be some weird final chapter if we do, but I think we probably will. I think that he feels like he's decided, well, this part we will go back to, whether it becomes the main payoff or just something that fizzles out again relatively early. I mean, if the third book's anything like this book, the very first chapter will be retelling the final chapter of the previous book.
Almost certainly, yeah.
Because there was a lot of that when they went on. And the whole first chapter was like, it feels like I've read all of this before. There's no kind of apology about it. There's no kind of remembering. It just kind of carries on and retells it.
He literally just
detail.
Redoes the final chapter of the last book. He just retells as the first chapter of this one with no new information. So it's not like we get a different perspective on the events. They're the same events. And again, it sets a tone for a book where the author is desperate to fill his page count, his word count. Unforgivable, really. But the issue for me with this is that I came out of the first book. It wasn't amazing, but I kind of enjoyed it enough. It had the tropes of fantasy genre fiction. And it felt like it was set in the Warhammer world, and Wolf was kind of cool, and there was some interesting stuff. Okay, Kislev's pretty cool. This mine is pretty good. So I came out of it thinking that's all right. And there's enough interesting mystery here for me to want to find out what it all means. Having read this book, I'm now convinced that it doesn't mean anything. And whatever the revelations are for any of this stuff, it's going to be so just limp and just boring that it won't be satisfying. There's no conclusion to this mystery now that could be satisfying enough to tie together all of the stuff and to sort of add any kind of weight or excitement to what we've seen Konrad go through. Partly because Konrad has no agency in this book at all. He's such an uninteresting protagonist.
Yeah,
He's just
yeah,
doing stuff because the stuff's been put in front of him. I guess we've talked before about how William King was inspired to write Gotrek and Felix by his own Wolfrup adventures, and he was able to sort of bring the best parts of an RPG adventure into a fictional story. Whereas this feels like Ferring has brought the worst parts of an RPG adventure into a novel because it's railroady, it's lacking in any kind of substance, it's lacking in interesting NPCs. The player character, so in this case Konrad, has nothing to say about anything and doesn't want to interact with anything he encounters. He's literally going from place to place to place because the games master has said, now you need to go to Altdorf. so
yeah.
so like that's just where the next bit of action takes place. And yeah, it's not
it
good.
does feel like those really core important story arcs haven't been mapped out by the author for the trilogy.
Yeah.
And because the more you realize that it feels like he's stumbling along, making it up as he goes along, it removes that power. So even if we do find out there's a cool twist to do with this heraldry, this emblem on the shield, because the author, I don't feel the author knew that all the way along from the first moment he wrote it. It takes away that kind of the epicness of the story and that kind of feel of it all. It removes any gravitas from it or any kind of sort of the idea of the wider body. It feels like there's just so many things it could possibly be, but not in a good way. Not that kind of, oh, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. It's more, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Who knows? It's just odd.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm actually really looking forward to, in a bizarre way now. I'm actually really looking forward to the final story, just because I think it's going to be funny.
Oh no, no,
not in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really not looking forward to the third part now, and it's a shame because Konrad, I would have defended the first part and people have said, oh, Konrad, it's they're bad books, they're no fun. I had enough fun with the first part. I thought there were some cool ideas. Come up, when he disguises himself as a chaos beast man, and he's
some
sort of
cool
forced
scenes in it. But there's cool scenes in this as well. There are cool parts of it.
Yeah, there are, but they're just
elements
too
in
slight.
the isolation. Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole captive by the Chaos Marauders scene, and that part of it is good, and you could have explored that longer. But then I suppose we've just read, it might not be out what order, but we've recently read Riders of the Dead, which does that so well.
Yeah.
So this is very, very different compared to that.
Agreed. Yeah, it didn't do it any favors, I think, having just read Dan Abnett's version of the same thing. So I agree. There was kind of so in Riders of the Dead, which we've got an episode of the GW Books Club, a bonus episode about that book coming out soon. In that book, an Empire soldier gets taken prisoner by Chaos, and the way in which it's all described, the story arcs, the character progression that occurs whilst this person is a captive of Chaos is incredible. And then you read this, and this was very much the sort of, okay, well, if Dan Abnett just wrote the sort of the Robert De Niro performed version of that sequence of events, this is like the Stallone or the Arnie version. There's still merit to it. It could still be a lot of fun, but it does not have the same depth at all. And so, yeah, I mean, that sequence of events, it was fine. I thought, it's a sort of a silly action movie version of that stuff, but that's fine. I'm here for that. I'm reading some, many of these books are that, so that's fine. But it then didn't go anywhere interesting after that. I felt.
I agree. I wish they kept on with that. I'd rather that be the essence of this whole story.
Well, it could have been, right? It could have been
with the suit of armor right at the end, and him realizing at the end of the book that he was trapped in it.
Sure, yeah,
that would have been a good story.
That could have been great, actually, if the Bronze Knight was part of the marauding horde and there was some more relationship there, and Konrad stays a captive, not because he has to, but because he wants to get close to the knight, the bronze armored knight. That could be interesting. And throughout the course of the novel, he's using his position as a captive to try and get more information out of Custring about what was really happening in the village. Why was the knight there? What was, all of this sort of stuff.
Some good ideas. I quite like Custring as a character that we saw very cool, briefly.
Yeah.
I think it went downhill from the moment. Maybe you could argue when he put the armor on, but if the payoff for that was better, that wouldn't be the problem. It's from the moment wizard. The armor was removed from the wizard's arrival. Yes, that's where. Because
it's very much a separate novel as well, isn't it? I mean,
it's completely
there's other structural problems, but it's basically a different book. Yeah. The whole thing, it very much felt like the kind of writing of season 8 of Game of Thrones, and that kind of convenient approach to writing, but without any of that budget, with like the budget of Biker Grove or something, because it was really rough. I just didn't enjoy it. And actually, that sort of speculative version of if you'd spent more time with Castring and you'd spent more time finding out about what happened to his childhood, you could have also seeded in that big final twist a lot like smoother, and it could have been more of a surprise. So we find Skullface. He's actually been pulling Gaxar's strings, presumably, because in the very final conflict, Gaxar is killed. The Skaven are going to overwhelm our heroes. So they jump into an underground stream, and they're going to sort of be dragged away. And that's going to be their escape route. And then just as Konrad's about to go under the water, he sees on a ledge overlooking the Skaven Skullface, and stood next to him Elissa. So Konrad's lost love, who died, quote unquote, in the village being burned down when Konrad was a young man 5 years ago, when it got burned down. So the village had been burned down. 5 years earlier, Konrad's village got burned down. So I don't know if you remember that.
Did it get burned down?
It got burned down.
Got that bit. I'm glad you reminded me.
But yes, Konrad thought Elissa had died. Now, it was always seemed pretty clear that she hadn't, but Konrad thought she had.
It wasn't a surprise.
Yeah, there was enough in there. I've got no problem with that. I think that's absolutely fine, to sort of do that reveal. But to have it be like literally the final line of the book with no extra anything. So Skullface is alive and he's here. And not only that, Elissa is with him. Maybe that's a good sort of sting to end the book on. But because there's I guess I'm probably being overly harsh. Maybe it is go into your third part with that as the sort of cliffhanger. But because the rest of the book lacked any substance, it just felt like another thing that was
exactly. I think maybe the name Skullfaces. I mean, it's like we got Skeletor and Evil Lyn from the Masters of the Universe live action film with Dolph Lundgren in that final scene. That's the way I picture Skullface. It's
definitely
who knows? I suppose we know the first chapter is going to be the retelling of the final chapter, so we'll get to see Gaxar die again. This time the bolt will shoot round and kill a couple of other people on the way.
I mean, I think, what I will. So I've got just another moment of pure pedantry, if I can, and then I'll just add some extra notes that I thought were nice, were cool ideas. So there is, well, two things, I suppose. One is that we get Konrad's second sight that is just completely like removed for no reason in the book. It basically fails. Konrad remembers he has it, and then he says, "Oh, I've stopped using it. I don't really need it. I've become such an incredible combatant that I don't even rely on my ability to see the future anymore." And then he gets beaten and captured like 5 times. So I found that very silly for for Konrad to think that he was beyond needing to see the future. And then the other bit of pedantry I've got is that at one point, at one point, Konrad says he's thinking to himself, or he might even say it out loud to Heinle, because Kislev is so broad and just empty, it's impossible to get ambushed. So he literally says this. He says it's impossible to get ambushed in Kislev because, you'll see an enemy coming, and then and it's literally the next page. He then says, "Oh, that reminds me of when my soldiers got ambushed in Kislev," and it just like did no one read? Did no one read any of the previous text when they were writing the next bit? I don't know. But anyways, that's pure pedantry. But then there were some things that I did think was cool. There was a really like cool atmospheric description of Morsley, the Chaos Moon, and how it was sort of it had like the absence of light, and it was kind of drawing light into it. I thought that was very cool. That was some really good sort of visual stuff. And then there was the snake hilt on Custring's sword. So when Konrad first gets captured, he goes to grab this sword, and it's got a sort of snake, not sculpture, but carved into the actual hilt of it. But then because he's not a chaos worshipper, or because he's not Custring, it comes to life and then bites him, and sort of there's a venom in the bite. And I thought that was really cool. It's like a chaos weapon.
Quite nicely done.
The sword comes to life, the snake bit bites you. So that was very cool. And because we'd had a description earlier on of Konrad having received some aid from an elf who had healed one of his arms, he talked a few times about how that magical sort of healing had a lingering positive effect, and that that meant that that arm would heal quicker. And it was also that arm being bitten by the poisonous snake was the reason he didn't die, because it still had this sort of magical elf healing, this lingering
potion
effect.
of protection rather than a potion of healing.
yeah, basically. But I really liked that. I thought that was one of the few things where it was like set up earlier on. We were reminded of it in an interesting way, and then it had like a payoff. It had like a good value to it. Yeah. So, it happened once in a 250-page book. So I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, I haven't got any for you. I haven't got any moments that really kind of stood out. I'm like, I like this. Yeah, not really.
I mean, I think I've got a sense here, Stu. But were you a big fan of the book? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's like. Reminds me of Burning Villages a lot now. It is a thumbs down. And I'd recommend only reading it for the experience, rather than if you were looking for a decent story, you would not be picking up. And in so much so that I would say, if before, I can't even remember what I said, but if before I'd said, Konrad was okay, which I think that's what we said, I'd say that this is so bad that I'd say I'd retrospectively go back and say, well, just don't read Konrad either. Don't start the series, because there are better things you could do with your time.
Sure.
But if you want it for that whole experience of, what is wrong with this, then go ahead. And when we're reading this series for the experience, luckily we're really enjoying an awful lot of it. And bizarrely, I am looking forward to the next book, just purely from a morbid fascination, I suppose. But if we stopped doing book club now, I probably wouldn't pick it up. It's about enjoying it with you and having the conversation with you. And I think we've had probably more laughs today than we have on because it's been so bad. It's been funny, but I wouldn't go out my way to read it as a piece of literature.
Yeah, I think that's very, very fair. I don't think I'm willing to say that I think Konrad, the first part, still remains perfectly fine for me. I think Konrad, the original book, still thumbs up. I think it poses enough interesting questions. If you were to never read the rest of the trilogy from that point, you could kind of leave it in this sort of imagined
You may
world.
feel if you start a trilogy and only read the first book that you're missing out,
You
but you're
might,
really not.
yeah,
You're
yeah, you're
not.
not.
You're not.
But yeah, I think there was still enough in that book that I enjoyed and I thought was good Warhammer fiction.
Mm.
This book, absolutely a thumbs down, and as I said earlier on, easily for me the worst story we've read, and some of that's because of the just the volume of pages compared to some of the short stories. I mean, some of the short stories were bad, but this probably isn't as bad as those short stories, but because it's so much longer, that makes it worse for me.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, whether I can't know what the the perspective or the thinking of the author and the editor was going into this one, but it doesn't feel to me like enough care was taken, like it mattered enough for anybody to put sufficient effort into making this book good. This is the first time in the GW books sort of series where I felt like my time as a reader was not valued by the author. And they just didn't care. They weren't trying to give me an exciting story. They weren't trying to do anything clever. They weren't trying to even we've had some of the books where it's kind of, the Brian Craig stuff, the Orfeo trilogy. They felt like they weren't necessarily someone doing their best to write a Warhammer novel. But I don't for a second think that Brian Craig wasn't trying to write a good novel. I think he was trying to tell a specific story. He wanted to tell that story with Orfeo. It just might not have worked for Warhammer, or it might not have worked for me in every way. In this case, it doesn't even feel like David Ferring is trying to tell any story. He just has to because he's got a mortgage. So, it just has that real feel of someone doing a job only because it's their job. And that's not good enough for a book, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I was very disappointed by this one. But yeah, I mean, what will Warblade? I think that's the name of the third part, right? The final Konrad story. We'll get to it eventually. I think we've got a number of Dark Future books to go. I think we've got some more Jack Yeovil Warhammer Fantasy, so that's quite exciting. I'm looking forward to that. And there's obviously, when we get into box tree books and all that sort of stuff, there's more Ian Watson sci-fi magic to come. So there's plenty more like exciting stuff out there. If and when we get to the final part of the Konrad trilogy, maybe I will have had enough distance to have refilled my tolerance for whatever this is. But at the moment, I'm not looking forward to it.
No. At least we got some time. We got some time. We got to deal with some other things.
Yeah, you're right as well. It's been fun. I can only apologize for being so forthright in my opinions, but it really rankled me. It really left me in a bad mood. I was in after reading this book. So that's just not a good win. That's not a good win, I don't think. You mentioned before, Stu, that we've done a Riders of the Dead special episode. So that is a Warhammer Fantasy Black Library novel. So not one of the GW books. It's written by Dan Abnett, came out in around 2003. And it's actually the prelude to the Storm of Chaos. So the major global summer campaign that took place in the 6th edition of Warhammer Fantasy. So I've got a load of content coming out in September, all about the Storm of Chaos and chaos generally. So we thought it would be good to start by reading a book that sort of sets the tone. And it, we don't have to discuss it now. This is a whole episode worth of discussion. But I think it's fair to say that we both enjoyed it and there was a lot of good stuff in that book.
Yeah, night and day,
Yeah, a very different experience for sure.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's going to be out. That's going to be available on the new Jordan Sorcery Pods channel. So for anybody who hasn't seen any of my announcement stuff, from September, there is a second Jordan Sorcery channel. Jordan Sorcery Pods is what it's called. That is now going to be the home for all long form conversation content that used to sit on the Jordan Sorcery channel. So the GW Books Club is on there. All of my interviews with various members of the old Games Workshop teams and other tabletop designers and artists and writers. All of those interviews, all of the Books Club, the GW Films Club, where I talk about the influences that movies have had on Games Workshop stuff. All of that now sits on Jordan Sorcery Pods. And there's complicated algorithmic reasons for that I talk about in a video on my channel. You can find that when it's released. But I put a link to that new channel in the description of this video. So if you want to stay up to date with the GW Films Club, the GW Books Club, and in conversation with Jordan Sorcery, that's the place to go. Stu, where can people find all of your content on the internet?
Well, I only have the one channel for now, so Miniature Realms, and I'm too scared to start splitting things off into different channels to appease the algorithm gods. Even though maybe I should do sometimes, but yeah, Miniature Realms on YouTube.
Sure, and I'll put a link to all of that down below in the description so people can find you. And yes, I'm just being buffeted around by the algorithmic gods in the same way Konrad was, passively just responding to what the gods will. So this is very Zinchian, I think, YouTube, isn't it? There's a lot of impossible to fathom decision making. But you can find links to all of the Jordan Sorcery stuff down in the description below. We've both got our own Patreons, we've both got our own Discords, all of that sort of good stuff. So go and check that out if you want to find out more content from us. The next official GW Books Club original book that we're going to be reading is Crocodile Tears, which is the Jack Yeovil Dark Future book. So that should be a good one, I think.
I hope so. What's it here?
Look at that!
It's ready.
That's a great reveal.
It was the last one I couldn't find as well. So it was managed to get that a couple of weeks ago. So all sorted now. Because I think on previous episodes I've pleaded for anyone that might know where one might be, but I was able to get hold of it.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking forward to it, actually, because I think we had a lot of fun with the last Dark Future book, and Jack Yeovil or Kim Newman is just one of the best GW Books writers, I think. So should be good. Absolutely. So definitely, well, can't guarantee it, but I expect it to be a more positive discussion than this one. But as ever, Stu, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, everybody else, for joining us for the GW Books Club, where we talked about Shadowbreed, the second Konrad novel. What a wild ride. Lot of fun. See you for now.